Alright, listen up, cabbies. I got your assignments. Riga, 643. Wheeler, 148. Nardo, 804. And all of you need to join host HP and Father Malone as they examine one of the greatest sitcoms in television history, Taxi. In Night, Mr. Walters, a Taxi podcast. Banter, zero, like your boxing record.
Night, Mr. Walters.
We're in Way Media. Good evening, Midnight viewers. Father Malone here. Tonight, we're talking to Mr. Jeffrey Wolf. He started his career as an editor working on films like Mikey and Nicky, The Wiz, and Network, and would eventually work with such diverse filmmakers as Arthur Penn, Ted Demme, and the Sultan of Sleaze, Mr. John Waters. But he's here to discuss the 8 episodes he edited and the one he directed for Tales from the Darkside. You'll find that interview at the halfway point of the show. Welcome back to Midnight Viewing, the horror anthology podcast, where this season we're taking a look at George A. Romero's 1980s series, Tales from the Darkside. Sharing the Midnight View with me are the Culture Cast Chris Stachiw.
I wanted to do something from the Warriors, but I just forgot the goddamn quote.
Also joining us is the Projection Booth's Mike White.
That's right. You said you'd kill me last.
Even better. Now, tonight we're taking a look at 2 episodes from Season 1. They are Slippage and Inside the Closet. Slippage, Season 1, Episode number 6. It originally aired on November the 11th, 1984. This was written by Mark Durand from a story by Michael Cube McDowell. That's not our Tales from the Darkside's Michael McDowell. It's a whole other Michael McDowell. Michael Cube McDowell, he's a novelist and a short story writer. And this one was directed by Michael Gornick, who is absolutely George A. Romero royalty. He's been his DP since Martin. And this, I believe, is his directorial debut. This one stars David Patrick Kelly. I think he'd been at least 2 Luthers by this point, if not 3.
I mostly know him as Jerry Horn. Him and that
Oh my God.
frickin' brie sandwich from...
I was just thinking that. Every time I think of David Patrick Kelly, I can't help but think the man who turned me on to bread and brie. Just a big old baguette. Oh, anyway. It also stars Philip Kasnoff, Kerry Armstrong, and David Lippman, who's a perpetual Law and Order judge. It is the story of a graphic designer who slowly begins to slip out of existence. Anyway, what'd you think of this one, Mike?
I remember when, I believe it was Bruce Willis, was having a very similar problem to what Rich Hall, not Rich Hall from not necessarily the news and SCTV, no, not SCTV, SNL, famous for the invention of Sniglets. I remember when, it felt very Saturday to me. This felt very familiar as far as somebody slipping out of their existence. And unfortunately, people didn't start talking nonsense before he slipped out of existence, or else that would have reminded me of another episode of Twilight Zone. But yeah, it was all right. I mean, I love David Patrick Kelly, so seeing him was pretty good. I don't know if were his buddy and girlfriend, were they having an affair, or did he just think that they were having an affair? Like, I was a little unsure about that. But overall, it's all right.
It doesn't benefit from the fact that something like a Saturday exists, and I don't get what's going on here in a lot of ways. Like, David Patrick Kelly's just monologuing a lot about, like, Richard Hall cared less and less to connect, and he started to slip through the cracks of time. Like, best I can tell, all these things were actually happening to him, not because of him, unless that was going on before the episode, which I can't get the sense of that, because he seems, when he starts finding out things aren't happening, he seems rather proactive. about it, or at least more maybe reactive, maybe not proactive, but like, how do you also know something that you don't know is happening? But it's weird. Like, I get what the premise is getting at, and I get this idea of like someone who's not connected with time anymore effectively disappearing, but that, in my read of what was happening here, isn't what was going on. And then there's like a weird like coda to the episode that I understand even less, because I guess now he's literally invisible, ? The performances were fine, but the narrative itself is a little all over the place, to say the least.
This has the same problem as Shatterday, which is we don't get to know the guy enough before this begins to happen to him. In the case of Shatterday, it's pretty well laid out, at least, that he's been doing nothing with his life and passed over, and he doesn't care, and he doesn't call his mother, and he doesn't give a shit about that girlfriend that he abandoned. So we're given all of that. Here, this is a different story. This story seems to want to be, hey, guess what? Sometimes you just fucking wink out of existence. But instead, it tries to, at the end, with David Patrick Kelly's final monologue, give us this idea that he hadn't engaged in life at all, and so he slipped through a crack in existence. And I don't know, it just didn't feel like he deserved that. Like, you're right, he did seem proactive about things. It wasn't like he was letting life pass him by. It was just like, as soon as he realizes there's a problem, he tries to fix it. So I don't understand why he's being punished, unless it's just, hey, it is that random thing sometimes, motherfucker, because that I really understand.
But it doesn't seem like that. It all seems very like intentional in a way that he can't control, but he's trying to correct. And I just don't get it. Like, oh, this other guy got the job and they couldn't find his Social Security or anything. Like, I couldn't even find his portfolio. It's like, did this guy even apply? Like,
do you know what it was? It was that little shit-eating kid from the first episode that was fucking with Dick Tayback. Yeah.
That's what this is again? I mean, in a lot of ways, it did remind me of that episode, in that, like, what is happening here is really not fully explained, at least not in a satisfying way. Maybe it's kind of meant to be more ambiguous, which is fine, but I don't understand what they were getting at. I would like to mention, because he showed up in the last episode and his name shows up again, original music by Tom Noonan in this episode.
Yeah, he wrote music for his episode, and here's one of two things is happening, and I will ascertain this problem and follow up in a future episode, but one of two things occurred. Either he laid down some beds and sold them a couple of beds of tracks that they're continuing to use, or someone has mislabeled the credits of the original Tales from the Darkside, because as far as I know, he was not writing the incidental music for this episode.
Right.
He did for his own, and I believe that's probable. But you got to remember that these episodes were being produced on either coast. So this one is I believe, a West Coast episode. No, this is an East Coast episode. So I don't know. It would be a little more likely that they would have used them, but I don't understand why they would have. But anyway, I'll figure that out and get back to you guys on that one.
And the other thing I didn't understand about this episode, so we have the David Patrick Kelly character going like, I didn't get invited to my reunion. I applied for this job and they haven't found my application. My wife is applying for a car in her maiden name, not in her married name. And all of those things seem like they could have happened accidentally. And then all of a sudden, like, his friends are like trying to figure out how to help him. And they're like, his mom doesn't recognize him. And it's like, why do you guys recognize him at this moment? Like, I didn't understand what was going on in terms of how the mechanism of him disappearing worked within the narrative and how it was manifesting in the lives of the people. Because, like, we see his mom literally not recognize him, but his friends recognize him until they don't. Like, literally, he recognizes him in that scene until he's like, who's rich? And it's like, wait, what? Like, literally on a dime it can happen?
Yeah, and he seems to know what's going on because he's got those three pictures. Here I am as a baby. Here I am now. Here I am in the future, but I'm never going to get to this future. I'm like, okay.
Right.
Yeah, it's unusual again that he just sort of worked it out and then decided to graphically draw it just in case anyone dropped by. Look, the fact is, the following year in 1985, Twilight Zone would do this so much better with Shatterday. Any little quibble you just heard me mention about Shatterday is wipe that away. That's a great version of what the story that this is trying to tell. That story, which was originally published in Gallery magazine in 1975 by Harlan Ellison. This story, Slippage, was originally published in 1982 in Twilight Zone magazine, ironically enough. Super ironically enough, because at the same time, Harlan Ellison had a column in that magazine. Hey, sign it's 1984. Aerobics. Dave Patrick Kelly has a couple of jaunty buttons on his jacket. I didn't get a close-up of them, but it's just, they're there just to let us know he's artistic. I don't care if your favorite movie is It's a Wonderful Life. The only time to watch that is Christmas, and this did not seem like a Christmas episode. That was a fucking weird move just to throw that in to let us know that they know, that we know, that they know.
That, yeah, I mean, that's all it is, right? That's literally all it is. It's just to be like, wink, wink, nod, nod. We get that we're doing like the It's a Wonderful Life thing. Like, but like, you know what the worst thing you can do in mediocre media is? Remind us of something much better, which is exactly what they did.
Yeah.
I intentionally too. Like, again, there's always an intent, but sometimes it's like, oh, we just had it, some cheeky production designer put it on the TV during a scene. Like, no, they say, hey, It's a Wonderful Life is on. Would you like to watch it? Like, what?
How about we go to the cinema and see it?
Yeah, let us get some popcorn and drink, please.
My favorite sniglet, snargling. That's when you look through crooked fingers during a horror movie because you want to watch but can't take it. Snargling. Anyway, once again, I want to remark on David Patrick Kelly, how fucking great he is here. This is David Patrick Kelly around the time he did that Dreamscape movie.
Oh, yeah.
Classic. I'm now urging everyone within the sound of my voice to go watch if you haven't seen it. He is so fucking good in that movie. And it's a good movie in general. Okay, gentlemen, we all have significant others, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure in the course of our relationships, we've all fought with those people at some point or another, right? Sometimes bitterly, sometimes to the point where you think, what the hell is going on here? But I got to tell you, never once, ever in my life have I ever thought, it might be better if this person hadn't been born. As soon as our female lead says that, could you imagine thinking that ever about someone you loved?
No.
If I said it, I really hope that the Tales from the Darkside isn't listening.
Too late.
I mean, really, like, you know what I mean? Like, that's the thing. It's like, I mean, I can imagine getting to that point, but like uttering it out loud. Yeah. Mm-hmm. It's a lot. Like, it's a lot. And she the moment she says it, you're like, well, there goes him. He's fucked. Like,
yeah, like they don't need him to wink out of existence. Obviously, you two weren't involved, but like maybe they're the problem. Shouldn't they be slipping out of existence? I don't know.
Right.
The fact that they frame it at the end that this is somehow his fault, like, just pisses me off about this episode.
It robs the episode of any of its emotional weight, like, completely. I don't understand what we're supposed to take away from the episode if it's his fault. And also, is he now just invisible? Because how does one see the Invisible Man?
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking of the Incredible Shrinking Man. Like maybe he would just keep fading and fading and fading. Like he reaches one dimension where we don't see him anymore, and it just keeps getting less and less. But yeah, that whole weird door opening closing. I'm like, oh, so he's still with us? I thought he slipped into nothingness. But yeah, that really was like a very false note to end on.
Yeah, because if they wanted us to know that he saw them completely forget him, then don't wink him out of existence until the last moment. By the way, the shot of him actually winking out of existence was great. Michael Gornick is a fantastic DP, and he's working with, I believe, Ernest Dickerson here. The episode is shot wonderfully. It's just that this story is so disappointing given everything we've been getting on Darkside, and with the comparison of another series that we covered where they fucking nailed it.
And because David Patrick Kelly is so good. Like, even though he's saddled with this kind of thankless role of being like the guy who everybody else is forgetting, but the episode is trying to convince us that he's the one forgetting, you can put yourself in that guy's shoes for 2 seconds, and like you would be just as harried as he is by the end of it. And I think he plays it rather well. I just don't think the episode has any interest in actually mining any emotional weight here. It's just, I don't know what it's trying to do. Be cheeky. Whatever it's trying to do, I don't think it succeeds on any front in terms of a like lasting emotional impact at the end of the episode.
Yeah, which is a real shame because, like you were saying, Father Malone, there is a lot of talent behind this. There's a lot of talent in front of the camera. I love David Patrick Kelly, but, and again, we were talking in the last episode about why do you have Tippi Hedren in this and you don't give her anything to do? Well, it's like you've got David Patrick Kelly, but you've got him with one of the lightweights, and I'm like, no, give me other people. Either make him more, and I hate to say this, more present, or get some better supporting actors so that you feel that there's some evenness to these roles, because I'm just looking at him and I don't care about the other two at all because they're not capturing me.
Yeah, this needn't have been a story of ambiguity. We didn't need half the episode to wonder, hey, what's going on here? It should have begun with, you're no longer here. And then he goes to his girlfriend, knocks on the girlfriend's door. It should have been an escalation. They have David Patrick Kelly here. To watch him for 20 minutes in misery would be a wonderful viewing experience. I mean, I know that sounds terrible, but it is what you're saying, Mike. Like he should have been more present in the episode. Everyone else was a waste of time.
Mm-hmm.
They weren't engaging characters. They were just there to, I don't know. The script is the problem here. Everyone in front of and behind the camera are operating very, very well, except for that one actor.
It's a shame because it has the makings of a great episode, but I think it just really stumbles seemingly at every opportunity it gets.
Mm-hmm.
I actually learned a lot about horror from Tom Savini, who was afraid of spiders until he went out and got a black widow and let it crawl around him for a week or so, so that he could overcome his fear. And
But I believe that's called the exposure method, right? You're afraid of a thunderstorm. Like G. Gordon Liddy was famous for that. He tied himself to a tree during a lightning storm to get over that fear. But it's so much better coming from Tom Savini.
It was a way of, if I could scare myself, that I knew that something good was happening. So that was always the intention on that show. I didn't really come from that kind of, the films I had worked on previously had been a little spooky, but not scary in that way.
Now, let's talk about that. Midnight Viewers, we're talking with Jeffrey Wolf. He is Tales from the Dark Side royalty, edited 8 episodes, directed 1. But and direct or worked with on 2 of the best with, you just mentioned him, Tom Savini, who I'm dying to talk about those episodes. But you say you weren't in horror beforehand. What were you working on leading up? And how did you get to Tales from the Dark Side?
I'd come through the system in New York. I worked on a movie called Mikey and Nicky with John Cassavetes and Peter Falk. I worked on The Godfather for television. I worked on Network.
How was that experience? Please say anything you can about that genius movie.
In kind of in apprentice roles, and then assistant roles, and then sound roles. At the time you kind of moved through the system. But they were mostly kind of Hollywood or New York based Hollywood style movies. But I did have an independent bent in me. And at a festival, New York Independent Film Festival, I met a woman named Jan Saunders, who was one of the producers early on Darkside. And so I think that's how I got on. But earlier today, I was looking at some of the other people. I kind of remember there were 1 or 2 people there before me, but at a certain point, it was a rotation. Like you mentioned Rob Draper. I mean, I would do every other one and he would shoot every other one. And, a few other editors were in the same kind of boat. And we were doing it because they weren't like, I think at the time they were $100,000 budgets for each one. And and they were like shaving dollars off every 2 seconds, as you can imagine. And I think that, like all of us, if we got a bigger feature to do or something else to do, we'd leave for a while. And then if there's a show to do, we'd come back and things like that. But also, it's interesting that you don't cover monsters.
Not yet, we don't.
Because I had a lot of fun with those too. And it was sort of the same directing those. And that was kind of in that same genre. So, you get a little bit, I ended up doing comedy. Basically, the kinds of films I would do is comedy and scary, kind of scary films. I did a Brad Anderson movie called Vanishing on 7th Street. Came out a couple of years ago.
I remember. I love that movie.
More than
You also, you were working at a time in New York when there were a bunch of movies that were coming out that I think are wildly underrated. You worked on Penn and Teller Get Killed.
I edited Penn and Teller Get Killed, yes.
What
I think that
great
is an
flick,
underrated
man.
But that was that's their shtick, it was a movie about two magicians who shoot themselves in the foot all the time. And the movie kind of did that as well. But I heard great, I just did a panel on Saturday night for Dee Dee Allen, who edited Bonnie and Clyde. And so Arthur Penn, who directed Penn and Teller Get Killed, which is kind of a bizarre concept in its own right.
Truly.
But Arthur told me in that famous scene at the end of the movie where they get riddled with machine guns that Warren's caps didn't go off, only Faye's did. And so she's like exploding all over the place, and he's just standing there with this dumb look on his face. And that was one of the ways we wanted to end the Penn and Teller movie.
Oh, okay.
Was to have Teller just stand there while Penn exploded. It ended up being, I think, a truck on a highway or something like that. Anyway, yes.
Well, since we've stepped sort of outside and we're talking about your feature work, I spoke to you a little bit in the email. Can you tell me about your work with Mr. Ted Demme? I think he's a fucking hero. Not only for creating Yo MTV Rap, which was absolutely revolutionary. Like, about time somebody did that on that goddamn channel. But that goes off and makes like an irreverent feature and sort of a dark comedic feature. The Ref, if it doesn't play in people's houses on Christmas, what's wrong with you? It is one of the best Christmas movies ever.
It's actually rated pretty high in terms of Christmas movies, but it's dark, so I think in this day and age, it may get more attention because people are willing to go that way. But so Ted, Ted is the nephew of Jonathan Demme. He went to high school with Ed Lover. That's how he knew him from TV. And so, it was unusual to have sort of that black-white combination at the time. Yeah. So it kind of made that show smooth in some way. And then, so from that, he got a gig. I don't know if you ever saw it, but called Who's the Man?
Oh, yeah.
And so
I had the soundtrack on rotation in my CD player at the time.
So Dr. Dre and Ed Lover were kind of like the Black Abbott and Costello. And in fact, Dr. Dre got his name before the famous Dr. Dre. But that movie was very interesting because Bob Shea at New Line actually saw it as a potential crossover movie, not just a black audience movie. And so they kind of released it that way. And then we developed this relationship and we did some pretty interesting movies, not only The Ref, but Beautiful Girls and a movie called Monument Avenue with Dennis Leary.
Just about to mention Monument Avenue. I grew up in Revere, Massachusetts, just a stone's throw from Charlestown. So I love that flick.
And let's see what other. Oh, and then Light, which was supposed to be kind of a swinging. As Brian Grazer, he thought it was going to be a swinging dick movie, and it turned into kind of a funny, but also a little. There was a little bit of remorse in it. And in fact, there's an amazing scene that the studio made us take out. It's a 2-minute scene. I just want to mention it quickly, but a 2-minute scene with Cicely Tyson playing his mother, Eddie Murphy's mother. And she comes to the prison camp and he explains to her that he didn't want to be like his father. He really wanted to be legit. And, he kind of got caught in this thing and the rest of his life was spent there. So, so Ted was like a guy, I don't know, he was not the first person to do this, but the comedy came out of fiction and real life and narrative. And He's a great coach, he's really great with the crew and kind of keeping everybody involved.
This isn't in so much Who's the Man, but every feature afterwards, there's a strain of melancholy in all of his movies that I at least really respond to, but I can see where most people don't want that in their entertainment.
Yeah, and I think Dave Stewart did the score for 2 of the films, and he's sort of Willy Wonka at one point, but also kind of serious in another ways. Ted's wife, Amanda, was very good with her music connection, so there was always kind of an interesting twist with that as well. So I don't know if you ever, Greg Dooley in the Afghan Wigs did all the songs and Beautiful Girls.
Yeah, I know of them, and I saw the movie a long time ago. I'm sorry, I'm not as familiar with that soundtrack as I was Who's the Man, but then I was.
But that movie and Billy Madison, which he didn't direct, but for people in their 30s and 40s right now, those are sort of important films for them.
Absolutely. Speaking of important films, important filmmakers, perhaps the most important filmmaker, I would argue it, Mr. John Waters. How did you fall into his sphere?
Well, that's actually a Tales from the Darkside story. Or is it? Yeah, I think it's the one movie I directed for Tales from the Darkside was The Moth.
Right.
And Debbie Harries was just kind of starting her film career. And Leonard Finger, who was the casting director on many of those early shows, set me up with a meeting with her. And I remember going in to see, she was in a recording studio, and I went in to see her, to meet her. And we sat and we talked. And I said, you're going to do most of the acting in this movie on your back. And she said, that's what I've done most of my life. Through Debbie, I met John, basically. And I mean, talk about like getting out of your comfort zone. John was, he did a lot of things to try to make my sister and I uncomfortable as he could in the beginning to kind of tell us that it's all, he was funny before that kind of humor became
right
rigueur, He was, this year he's gotten so many awards. They had a whole show at the Academy Museum about him and his movies. He's been in the business 60 years or some ridiculous number. And then he got a star in the Walk of Shame. And the editing people, Ace, just gave him the Filmmaker of the Year award. So
stick around long enough, they will shower you with.
I know. And here we are talking about Tales from the Darkside, which I worked on 40 years ago. So
there you go.
There you have it.
It cuts across.
Yes, it does.
Okay, we should probably talk a little bit about that.
You did want to talk about The Wiz. And
yes.
You mentioned Network, both directed by Sidney Lumet. So
yeah,
that's part of, I had a good relationship with him, and Network was a really unique room to be in with Patty Chayefsky and Sidney and Alan Hyde, who edited all that jazz and early Mel Brooks movies. And so it was that was the follow-up to working with Elaine May on Mikey and Nicky. So I was really I was in these rooms with people who were brilliant,
It's an embarrassment of riches, sir.
And so The Wiz, was Michael Jackson and again, Sidney and Dee Dee Allen, who, edited Dog Day Afternoon and Bonnie and Clyde and, Serpico and Reds. And it was a very nice period of time. A lot of hard work, but
right.
A lot of hours. But anyway, so yeah, and The Wiz was unique. And
you were working in the music department for that one, right?
I actually started as a picture apprentice, and I worked all the way. I think I was on the film for almost a year, and so I ended up in the music department working with Quincy Jones as the music editor. So it was another education in its own right.
That's amazing.
And these were the days where you would, the music wasn't done in somebody's studio with computers. It was a 98-piece orchestra. Just getting everybody in the house and doing, in the studio, getting them coffee part of the good part of the day. Anyway.
No, that's amazing. Thank you for that. But let's talk Tales from the Darkside. Yeah. Okay, please tell me. All right, you get an assignment. How does it work? Somebody calls you. They say, "Hey, here's a script. It arrives by messenger. You're getting a bagel. What is your day like for a peddler?
My first show on Tales from the Dark Side was Inside the Closet. And remember, I'd worked on a lot of features beforehand in television. And so I really knew my way around the block. And Tom Savini had never directed a movie before, or a TV show for that matter. And I remember getting the script, and he was going to build. I was told that he was going to build the creature, and that it was written by Michael McDowell, who wrote Beetlejuice. And yeah, so it had a scary thing, but it felt short. And I just had an instinct that we were going to run short. And so I told Tom on the phone. I don't think I met him in person. I think he called me because, again, to save money, the editor would start on day one of shooting, so he never really got to speak to the director that much.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I remember telling Tom that he should get some extra shots, some B-roll, and he said, "I'm absolutely not going to do that." And he said, "It is what it is, and I'm very, very psyched to do it, and you're going to put it together exactly the way it is." I said, "But I think it's going to be short." And he said, "I'm not going to shoot it." So I think I ended up going to a producer and saying, "Why don't you go, like, after they finish shooting, have an, assistant cameraman just shoot the house with lights on, lights off, one light on, two lights off, whatever. Just
Sure.
get as shots as you can." Tom found out about it. He said, "If you use any of those shots, I'm going to kill your firstborn." And this is Tom Savini, who's not the least weird person you've ever met in your life.
It would be extravagant, at least.
And so, again, I had enough confidence to believe that, that we were going to need these shots. And sure enough, the first cut ended up like around 39 minutes or something like that. It needed to be 42 or something. I don't remember the exact amounts, but slowly he would say, "Well, why do you put one of those shots in?"
Oh,
And I
hey,
said,
remember that firstborn business?
Exactly. And then I think by the end, we used it 4 or 5 times. And it had a great effect because it added to, like, what's going on in this place. And then he's a master at what he does, but he didn't have the tricks that an editor, that somebody with experience would have. And so I couldn't figure out what kind of score to put on it as a temp score. And I ended up taking 2 classical music tracks and laying them up next to each other to kind of get a weird sound out of it. And they almost matched up perfectly. Like they would hit at the right places. And then, like, with a little bit of moving around, the vibe of the score just kept changing, which went along with what was happening in the film. And it's so typical, right? That it's one of the most popular shows of all the shows. But I think what it showed me is that if you have, like, the right combination of things, you just need to, like, figure out how to put it together in such a way that it's presentable, but the story itself will carry. And that's kind of, I guess, why that show works so well. But
Yeah, when I spoke to Robert Draper, and I'm going to keep saying this in every interview I do, you never want to say that there's a seminal episode, a perfect exemplar of a TV series, particularly when it comes to anthology series. But I'm saying it now. Inside the Closet is that episode of Tales from the Dark Side, everybody. It works spectacularly well, I think. And
also this young woman with Fritz Weaver, he's a perfect innkeeper, right? The perfect head of a place that rents out rooms, and then all those crazy animal heads on the wall, and I mean, it's just so creepy all the way around. And Paul brought in this creature that they never could have afforded to put in the show, and because it was his episode, he was able to do that. So I think that also added to the production value quite a bit.
100%. I mean, Lizzie she's the image you see. I think if you were to Google Tales from the Dark Side right now, you would get a picture of it. And it's funny because the B-roll stuff that you're talking about that you had them run out and do, it's some of the best parts of the episode. Not to stroke your ego there, but like it is a slow burn episode. We do need to see that house and how creepy it is.
Yeah, it's funny, just funny. Again, I've directed some myself since, and I directed some episodes there, and you just learn that you need something to back as a backup. You never know when you're going to need it. You don't know what shot it is specifically that you're going to need. On a bigger production, you'd be able to go back and shoot a bunch of stuff after the fact. But on a show like that, maybe on the next episode, they could grab something that you needed, but that house was so specific and everything. So it was very lucky. You don't have to stroke it, but it was like one of those lucky coincidences.
Now, was that typical for an episode? Would you get a script and just because you said you'd had feature experience and
most of the scripts were like you wrote down in the cards.
yes,
Yeah, that was directed by Ted Gershny, who was a very experienced guy. He had written novels, produced screenplays. He was married to Mary Warnow for a while. But the thing is, you didn't have many days. That's the other thing. You had 4 or 5 days to edit these things. And so, I remember he also had a little bit of a penchant of drinking alcohol. And the night we had to lock in the cards, we had a disagreement. I can't remember if it was the ending or if it was a specific shot, but we decided that we were going to drink and whoever was still standing. But yeah, we get their way because we have to turn the thing in the next morning. So it was like we just kept drinking. And then he passed out. I put the shot in that I wanted and we turned it in.
nice.
So, but it wasn't always like that. I'm thinking of like, well, in some ways, I had the editor had an effect, or at least I had an effect on all these things. I had gosh, let's see how I can tell the story as succinctly as possible.
Oh, go long.
So in college, I was very into an English, Rhodesian horn player named Michael Gibbs. And he was only like most of the kind of stuff I was listening to were Black musicians, but Michael was white, but from Rhodesia. And I played that album until the grooves broke. And many, many years later, I was looking to buy a car and I went to Brooklyn and I asked, the car was what I wanted. I see how we could go on a test drive together. And we go on this test drive and like halfway through the drive, and I said, "You're Michael Gibbs, aren't you?" And he said, "Yeah, I am." And I said, I've been listening to you for, since I was a kid. So we struck up this friendship and I got him a job doing the score for Halloween Candy.
Oh,
and so that was the beginning of a work relationship we had. I did this Burt Reynolds movie called Heat that he did the score for, and a couple other things. I think a couple of the Darkside and Monster episodes. But so it was always kind of trying to sort of work your way, getting favors from people or work your way into certain situations. I remember how the creepiest thing in Halloween Candy was to make a scary nursery rhyme kind of vibe to it, which was I thought was really effective for that show. And the Moth.
now, as an editor, the pacing and the style of the cutting is dependent on the story always, right? I mean, that's what it is. And then on top of that, you have the director who has their own vision of what it is. So in a case of like in the cards, he has a more definite vision than say like Tom Savini. No offense, Mr. Savini, I love you, but it was his first time. So he's not going to know as much, or he thinks maybe he's got the picture in his head.
And in the cards, Ted directed and wrote it.
So I'm wondering how much of your style gets in there per episode, do you think? Virtually none, right? Like you don't you mentioned you have like a 4-day time period. So I assume you're just cutting to cut.
You cut away and the director's not in there the whole time on those kinds of shows. So you might see him for a day or two, sometimes just a day. I think Savini, because it was an early episode, he may have been there longer. And then, but by the way, in the end, we got along great. And I follow him on Facebook. He's always doing something wild and crazy and having a good time doing what he does. So style, that's an interesting question because I don't think I have a style. I think I have a lot of tricks up my sleeve. I mean, I know how to get in and out of a situation, out of a corner. But I think, the idea is to kind of see, I would say this is across the board, is to try to see the movie or the scene in your head before you actually edit it. So that you and on a TV show like Darkside, it's a little harder, but on a feature, you kind of work the first couple of weeks to figure out what the rhythm of the show is. And then you hope you get it right and you try to kind of follow that all the way through. And then when the director finally comes in, they either say, well, I want it to go a little faster, or I want it to, we'll carve our way through certain sections. But I think Darkside, we kind of knew, I think the structure of that show is pretty similar from episode to episode. So I would say you're looking for the best performance. You're looking for, interesting line readings. You're playing around with music to see what you could help, with, but I don't think you're imposing a style.
Right.
Like you mentioned the Vanishing on 7th Street. At the end, it wasn't scary enough, and so we made a list of 5 possible scary moments, and we went back and tried to, shoot those scary moments and insert them in the film. So I think with Darkside, there was creepy and there was scary. There's like,
right.
Inside the Closet is kind of a scary show, but some of the other ones aren't quite as scary as that.
No, the Moth is creepy.
The Moth is creepy. And the woman who, I can't remember her name right now, but the woman who played the mother was really, she was wholesome, but so creepy in her own way. So,
no, she's fantastic because she pulls off. It's Jane Manning, by the way, is the name of the mom in that one. She pulls it up when she becomes Debbie Harry in the end. I believed it 100%.
So I'll tell you a funny story about the Moth is that for 2 weeks before, they didn't have a solution of how we were going to do the Moth coming out of her mouth.
Okay.
And so for 2 weeks, I was go to my sister's house at night, who lived in the suburbs of Jersey, and with a jar and try to collect moths, like turn all the lights on and try to collect. And it was truly going nowhere. And then they found a place in California that sold butterflies. And like, I think the day before the shoot, this box of butterflies show up. They're like, they come in like in little cellophane bags, like you would put a negative in, and they were dormant until you took them out of the bag, and then they would flap their wings. the much to my, I wasn't happy about it, but there wasn't much of a solution. Is they crazy glued filament to the butterfly so that they could control it, kind of like a kite,
the good old days.
And so while it was called the Moth, it was really a moth butterfly that flew out of her mouth. And I think we may have done it in reverse also, if I'm not mistaken. That we tried it a couple different ways to kind of have it come out. But I still,
butterfly is
still
acting
to this
as
day, I
asshole.
wake up hearing Debbie's voice going, "Moth."
No, okay, you know what? Since we're jumping forward, the Moth. Now, you'd edited a bunch of episodes. Did you ask to direct an episode? Were you offered the chance?
Yeah, I think in TV that was sort of rigor. Like once you to go back to your other question, I think once you knew the system, it was to their advantage to have you direct stuff, and I'm pretty sure that's how that happened. I can't remember. See, where was it I think it was one of the last shows of
Season 4.
It was
right.
so
episode 4.
away. I probably went away and came back, and I said, to be honest, I don't really remember, but I may have No, it's because Halloween Candy was season 2. So I must have gone away to do something else, and then they called me to do that. So
Yeah, I don't think you were present for season 3 necessarily. Okay, so you get to work with Debbie Harry and Jane Manning in this episode. Can I just say congratulations on the episode, because and
that's another one that's
I've said it to Robert Draper as well. We've watched a lot of anthology series on this show, and Tales from the Darkside consistently, in my mind, looks the best. Every one of them looks like a short film and not an episode of a television. And I'm consistently blown away by the fact that these are sets somewhere in Queens, I understand.
Yes.
And your episode, which looks like a country home, including the exterior. Good God, fantastic work.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, I wanted the curtain, because it was a small space. I wanted a curtain to separate where the mother was and where the beds were, and I couldn't fit. And I wanted us to be able to see shadows and reflection, not so much reflections, but shadows. And I was driving home, or maybe it was to visit my sister. And there was this hill off the New Jersey Turnpike that had burlap, kind of like these burlap walls sort of lining the thing. And it was sort of like, oh, that's it, burlap. And so I think that, I haven't seen the Moth lately. I think there's a really cool shot of Jane like behind the burlap, and you kind of see her shadow. And that was the other thing. Rob and I worked on a lot of stuff together. In fact, we also worked on a feature together. And so, we knew each other pretty well, and we could kind of like, try. And he's a great experimenter. Even today, when I see work that he's doing, he's always very experimental in what he does. But yeah, I think that's true, and I think that was one of the hallmarks of the show. And if you go through the list of DPs, there's some pretty good ones in there.
Yeah, Ernest Dickerson is a big one on the New York side.
Larry Banks. There are a couple other really good ones. So
your editor on that episode was Christina Bowden, right?
Christina Bowden, right?
Who went on to do Carlito's Way.
Yes.
My God.
She worked on several De Palma movies. Yeah, she has an interest. Look at her IMDb page. She has some interesting credits as well. Yes.
What's so funny to me is I think I've heard every story to come out of Hollywood, but there was such a vibrant scene going on in New York, and it never really gets examined, particularly the technical side of things. Like, I'm pretty sure Paul Hirsch was there, like, Thelma Schoonmaker was there. Yeah, my God, it was just like a cavalcade of talent, and it's unexamined or not examined enough.
Well, I'll tell you what. This came up with this Dee Dee Allen event the other night, is that Dee Dee brought in, starting with Bonnie and Clyde, she brought in some major Hollywood players, George Roy Hill, Arthur Penn, Warren Beatty, and many more, and Sidney Lumet. And she became sort of she probably single-handedly, started, not so much with Paul Hirsch, but Steve Roder, Jerry Greenberg, Craig McKay, they were all assistants or apprentices with Dee Dee at one point or the other. So, she developed the community here, and it was still a pretty small world. But you had movies like The French Connection and, Dog Day Afternoon and what other...
Taking a Pelham 1, 2, 3.
Paul Hirsch had done all those early, Taking a Pelham 1, 2, 3, Ghost Park. And De Palma was doing, Paul Hirsch was doing De Palma movies. So, that Carrie, I don't know if he did Carrie, but he did the one with Michael Caine.
Not Body Double. Dressed to Kill.
Yeah, Dressed to Kill.
He also did Phantom of the Paradise.
Yes, he did that.
Perhaps the greatest film of all time.
Yeah. Awesome. Certainly for your audience, it might be. Just teasing. Yeah, so I don't know the answer to that. What we always say is that, and it happened to me. I got pulled out to California to work on a lot of movies, but they wanted people with an edge, and then they would do everything they could to take the edge off. Like that. That was kind of how it worked.
So do you think the edge, if to retain that edge, you just needed to stay in New York?
I think there's some truth to that. And that's also changed. I mean, with the streamers and all that, it's a very different industry than it was. And, you know, it's because again, it was a small group and it was a small group of directors. And when those directors start to die off, like, Doctorow and Chayefsky or the writer Robert Benton, those guys were serious players. So, but it came out of like a cafe society. They had a literary, medals in their hands as well. So,
So New York folk not only had the intellectual but the gritty as well. How dare you? I know.
How long have you lived in Las Vegas? I did the movie in Las Vegas also.
Oh, I've been here for 23 years.
Well,
Yeah.
I did this movie at when the Sands Hotel still existed. It was called Heat with Burt Reynolds.
Oh, yes.
And it was a lot of fun, actually. Living in Vegas was quite a trip.
Do you go to set or, as near to set as possible, like as much as possible?
Not as much now because of the way, you can.
Oh, you can do it from home.
Yeah.
Transmit it to you.
Not only can you do it from home, but you can shoot this morning and have the dailies tonight in your apartment in New York City, like from anywhere in the world. So,
Mr. Wolf, do you miss the bins? Do you miss the 1,000 bins in the heads and the
bins.
tail?
I do miss the travel. I did I traveled a lot for film. You mentioned Madeline. I traveled for that. I went to the Philippines on a movie I'm sure you've heard of because you've got that kind of taste called McBain.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yes.
With
saw that in the theater.
Excuse me?
I saw that in the theater.
Wow. You're the one.
That was me.
Yeah. So I lived in the Philippines for almost 2 months, almost a little more than 2 months. That was a crazy place to be. Yeah. So I do sort of miss that side of it. Worked in London a bunch. Now, even getting to set for a day is unusual.
Do you find editors to be extraordinarily patient people?
Yeah.
Than your average grip?
Well, definitely. But yeah, patience is a funny word. Like you're always sort of hedging because if you have an idea for something, and this is what I think you mean by patient. If you have an idea for something and the director isn't receptive to it, you have plenty of time to wait him out or her out. Because you can wait a couple of weeks and then try it again and then try it again. But I would say we're patient, but also persistent. Like if we think that, if we think something should be, we'll keep pushing to try or figure out other ways of getting. And a big part of editing is when one person has one point of view and another person has another point of view, is to find not necessarily in the middle, but the other point of view that works for both of you. And oftentimes that's a better, it's a better choice. So yeah. So we're patient. Don't show, try not to show too much emotion, that kind of thing. But again, I know very passionate editors, and I know editors that you can barely get to talk. So
I've heard that getting a job as an editor, being interviewed to get an editor's gig, it's more about finding out whether or not you can stand to be with each other in the room. Do you find that to be true?
I would say there is a school of thought about that. I always, I never tended to work with directors who were in the room all the time, who were pushing me on that, just wanted me to be kind of a pair of hands in some way, and that would often come out in the interview. You kind of knew. And as I got more experience, it was an interview for me to them as much as it was
right.
I don't want to be in the room with a crazy person either. So, but you're right. I mean, that is a big part of, you're going to spend a lot of time together. There's no doubt about that. But again, today, people are out either shooting their next movie or developing their next movie. So you're lucky to get the director into the room
Wow.
because they're moving along. So
Is that a trend these days more and more, do you
it's
think?
sort of a trend. I mean, there are always going to be the Michael Manns and Oliver Stone types that, like are there all the time. But I don't think, the Abbott has created a lot of freedom all the way around.
Yeah. Just speaking of that freedom, does that feel a bit more freeing? Like that you're trusted to like put it together and they,
Yeah.
because
That way they can blame you each. It's a very different, like when Netflix got into the business, they were very trusting of the people who worked with them. Now they're more like a studio where they're very involved and, sometimes the notes are good, sometimes they're not so good. What the Abbott is allowed is to bring in a lot of voices. I think Netflix has several editors on staff that they work on their own films, but they can, they pay them so that they can send them a cut, get notes for themselves for the cut. And so, it doesn't have that, the business doesn't have that kind of that personal connection the way it used to. It was fun. Like you turn out a Tales from the Darkside. It was like, in a very short amount of time, you were making something that was kind of a fun treat. And since like your show, for instance, I have gotten jobs because of working on Tales from the Darkside. Somebody said, "Oh, when I was 17, I saw the Moth or whatever." Yeah. So there's.
Speaking of Tales from the Darkside and style, now when I spoke to Robert Draper, he said there was a definite house style that was sort of dictated to him from the beginning, that it was going to be all hard light like noir. Was there a house style for the editors? Were you given a thing, or it was
you kind of
best?
You kind of talked about that before, but I think there was a style to the scripts that they chose, and that kind of dictated the editing style as well. If you notice, there's not a lot of like montage work. It's a pretty straightforward, and there wasn't a lot of room for dolly shots. It was really a master 2-shot, close-up kind of show.
Right. From sort of the sublime, which I consider The Moth and Inside the Closet to be sublime episodes of the series, to Answer Me. Michael McDowell is a hero of mine, and he wrote a lot of the episodes, including the one you directed.
Right, he wrote at least 2 of the ones.
Oh, yeah, Inside the Closet.
Closet, right?
Yeah, I just think he's a genius. Apparently lived no fewer than like a few blocks from me growing up. He lived in Medford, Massachusetts, next to Revere, Massachusetts. Yeah. But Answer Me, how do you make tension from the phone? It works for a little while.
Well, I would say one of the things is she's a very good actress,
Certainly.
And, telephones, I use telephones as a scary, there's nothing like a quiet scene where a telephone goes off. So, to be honest with you, I remember vaguely, that show, but it's not like deep into my brain.
Oh yeah. I mean, I bring it up as a lark. It's just, it's a trifle of an episode. I just thought it was really funny that if the episode is hamstrung at all, it's because Michael McDowell chose to have her effectively just narrate the episode out loud, which, by the way, something avoided in your episode, The Moth, because there's some inner monologue stuff, some voiceover stuff that I thought was great and so appropriate. It gets tiresome in anthology shows where characters are constantly spilling the.
And also, it's interesting. I would say that was another show that felt like it was, it was going on too long. That there wasn't enough to kind of keep it going for the entire length of the show. But
you send the director that note. This is too long. Something needs to happen.
I don't think I went there on that. Let me see. Go ahead, Drew. I'm trying to see what the director even was on that. Oh, it was written by Michael. I didn't even write down the directors. But Rob shot that as well.
Yeah, he did. Which, I mean, it looks great. Like I said, the episode, even your worst episodes look better than some of the best Night Gallery, which is insanity.
There's one called The False Prophet.
Oh, yes.
Directed by a DP. I think that always helps a little bit too in that regard for those kinds of shows. What else?
Well, I mean, if you want to talk about Tear Collector for a second, I mentioned the Paradise being the greatest movie on earth. You balked at that, sir, but nevertheless, here's Miss Jessica Harper, the luminous Jessica Harper.
And also, I still see, who is the star of that?
Victor Garber.
Yeah, Victor Garber. I still see him around. He has a shock of white hair still. I mean, it's shock of hair, but it's pure white. He's on Broadway a lot. That was one of my favorite episodes of all, the Tear Collector.
It's fantastic.
It's such a great concept.
The Darkside was never shy of just doing two-hander character pieces and making them interesting. By the way, speaking of pace, that's another thing we're constantly marveling at on this show, on Darkside. Overall, you've got like basically 22 minutes. It always flies along. It never feels dragging. Quality of the writing is the barometer of whether or not an episode is going to work here.
And a good actor can kind of pull you through some of that. And Victor is a very strong actor. I'm trying to remember who was his co-star in that one?
Jessica Harper, sir.
Yeah, you mentioned that. Yeah, I just thought it was a great concept. I've been meaning to go up to him because I see him at events every once in a while. I have to go up to him sometime and talk about that episode with him. Because again, he was he was probably in his late 20s or early 30s on the show as well. So episode. Yeah.
Yeah, that's another thing we marvel at the New York episodes in particular, because you had just a wealth to draw from New York stage actors who, and I made this point the other night, that on Night Gallery, when you would get, someone who had some fame beforehand, it always felt like they were slumming. Whereas the New York actors are always just there to do the job. And
it's true. And I did a show, it was called The Gift. And I think it was Darkside, not Monsters, but was it Monsters? The Gift?
I think it's Monsters.
Anyway, it was Abe Vigoda.
Oh,
who was at the time super old.
Right.
But it was hilarious. That whenever you work with somebody who has that kind of the Godfather behind them. When I did Beautiful Girls, Richard Bright, you know who that is? He played the cop who shoots. It was one of the assassinations on the steps of the courthouse.
Oh yeah.
And he played Timothy Hutton's father, and so we would do scenes from The Godfather, because by that time with Ted, I was around the set a lot. In fact, I directed a lot of the B camera on Beautiful Girls. But we would do Oscar Day with Tim Hunt. Every day, one of the crew would act a scene with Tim Hunt, and we would call it Oscar Day. And then then there's a lot of talk with Richard Bright about The Godfather. So that was always fun.
Oscar Day is hilarious.
Yeah. So Abe Vigoda was in that one. It was called The Gift. I guess that was Monsters. I mean, that was Monsters. And then I did one called Stressed Environment. And I went to meet, I don't know if you know who this, historically, you probably know who she is, Carol Lindley.
Oh, yeah.
An old.
Oh, yeah. No. I know Carol Lindley.
Long show.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I always kind of had the hots for her when I was a kid. And so when they said you have it, we can hire her. I said, great, that would be wonderful. And then I went to meet her, and it turned out she had a little bit of a stroke.
Oh,
but it kind of, at first it was sort of maybe that's a great idea. But then it kind of had this weirdness to it that I think kind of worked in the show. I don't know if you remember, I took that show over. Somebody got sick. I think one of the showrunners was going to direct it. So it's the first episode of season 3. It's called Stressed Environment. And it was about these rats taking over the laboratory. But, also Richard Rubenstein, whenever there was a little sense of, nudity in any of those shows, it was because Richard really liked to see a little bit of nudity in the daily. So even if you knew you were never going to use a shot, you always wanted there to be something kind of sexy that would kind of get him into the show. We were advised.
Could you please talk about Mr. Richard Rubenstein, your interactions with him? He is one of my favorite producers of all time. I know that's not, people didn't usually say that sort of thing, but like his relationship with Romero through the 1970s, like was really felt like the old patron kind of relationship, you know, like here's
Very much so. He wasn't much of a film guy. That's the thing, is that I think his relationship with Romero was such that, you know, George could do what he wanted and Richard would find the money to pay for it, you know, and that was kind of his relationship all the way through. I think that he never got the sense he knew very much about film, but he kind of knew how to put these deals together. And look, you know, when Darkside, after that, Monsters, and then he made Darkside the movie, and excuse me, he did all those Romero movies. So he must have had something going on. But he wasn't sort of like, it wasn't like walking in a room with Robert Evans or something like that.
Right.
Or Jerry Bruckheimer or Don Simpson or whatever. He kind of was, I would call him and I mean this sort of affectionately, like a B producer as opposed to an A producer. And a lot of John Waters producers were kind of in that realm too. They weren't particularly mainstream, but they were, you know, adequate enough to be able to get a deal together. So.
Independent producers being independent producers, like, you know, it's more fascinating that it's not their first love. They like putting deals together. They like being part of something artistic.
Yeah.
Like
a lot of them came out of the garment industry too, which was a very kind of deal, you know, a dealer oriented profession, you know, selling shit. What they like, the Yiddish word for it is schmatas, you know, selling schmatas. So, yeah. So, look, you know, like, because actually I did a movie with Gordon Willis called Windows with Talia Shire. And that was produced by a guy who came out of the garment industry as well. So that was a typical money source in New York for a long time, is the garment industry.
Is everything too corporate these days, Mr. Wolf?
Yes. I can unequivocally say that, yes. Well, it's not as much, you know, the kind of camaraderie that exists in a group, in a community, you know, it's a lot harder to make that happen because, especially since COVID, I mean, COVID sent everybody home. Now, producers are liking people to be home because they don't have to rent editing rooms. They can ship an Avid to somebody's house and, you know, save a lot of money because the real estate value is higher than the value of the rental. So,
right. The plus side is you get to edit in your pajamas if you want to.
That's a challenge, just to get out of your pajamas. Yes. Because if you start in your pajamas at 5 o'clock, you're still going to be in your.
Yeah. Where do you go from there? Honestly,
there's nowhere to go. I'm looking at what other episodes that you might find interesting. Let's see. Oh, you know, another one that was kind of odd, but I enjoyed it because it was Eddie Bracken, and it was also shot by Rob, called
Ace of the Stubborns. Spectacular episode. with tiny Christian Slater.
Yeah. And like all, you know, I was looking at pictures today, all these, as he's decomposing, the makeup artist really had a lot of work to do to kind of, you know, make that work. And what's that movie where they're carrying a dead guy around all the time?
Oh, A Weekend at Bernie's.
Weekend at Bernie's. So I always kind of reminded me of Weekend at Bernie's.
It's so much better because he's animate and you get to watch him eat. It's the most vile thing on television ever.
Yeah. So, you know, I'm glad, you know, it's interesting. As I was going through YouTube, you know, there are a couple other people out there that do Tales from the Darkside shows. So, I mean, definitely
amateurs.
Amateurs. But the point is that it has this life that keeps on going. So it's kind of fun. Never know. You know, you don't know if you're going to make something that's like, when you start a film, it's either going to be a bomb, a cult classic, or something iconic. You know, like you just don't know. And, you know, even The Wiz the other day, which wasn't a terribly successful movie, I was moderating this panel and this woman comes up to me and said, The Wiz is my favorite movie. You know,
every movie is someone's favorite movie.
Yeah, I think so. You know, I did a movie called Out Cold. It was Casablanca on a ski slope. It starred Zach Galifianakis.
Galifianakis.
Yeah.
I've seen Out
Very
Cold.
You should check it out. It's pretty.
I thank you so much for taking some time and speaking with us
Sure.
today.
It was enjoyable. Now I'm going to have to go back and look at some of these episodes again.
Inside the Closet. This is season 1, episode 7. It aired originally on November the 18th, 1984. This is written by Michael McDowell, and directed by Tom Savini. It stars Fritz Weaver and Roberta Weiss. It is the tale of a grad student who rents a room from a professor that contains a tiny closet door that cannot be opened from the outside. What did you think of this one, Chris?
Oh boy. I'm glad I got asked first, because sometimes the litmus test, I wonder where you guys are with something like this. This was, maybe you guys liked it more than me. I enjoyed like the last 5 minutes. I mean, it was spinning its wheels for a while, but then once you kind of figure out, like once it gives up the ghost and shows you what's going on, it is wild. I mean, just the puppet is something like I've never seen before, but I feel like the 18 minutes that precede it are so just kind of, it reminded me a lot, Father Malone, of All Through the House from Tales from the Crypt. It was just like a thing and something stalking this person, and this person's walking around a house, and that's supposed to be enough. And then you get the reveal at the end that, oh, there is a monster, and the monster's horrifying. And like it has that same idea of just like, is this real? Isn't it? And in this, once we get the reveal, I think it kind of saves the episode, as it were. But man, that puppet at the end, it's like a Harlequin baby. Like, don't go looking that up if you don't want to, but it's the closest I've ever seen on screen to what is a Harlequin baby, at least like white skin, like red. It's awful. It's awful and intriguing, and I want to know what you guys think.
Yeah, last episode I was talking about how tight that Danny Yellow one was. What was it, the bet or whatever, or the odds?
Yeah.
This one, yeah, I was just like, is something going to freaking happen? And it doesn't help that, like, when you put this on, either on Plex or if you look at the IMDb, you get the little monster picture. So I'm just like, okay, cool. A monster is going to be in this. When? And then having Fritz Weaver there, and I always screw up with Fritz Weaver. Was he in Creepshow, right?
Oh yes, Dexter Stanley,
Okay.
The Crate.
All right. I just want to make sure, because there are times where there's another actor who I always think that's Fritz Weaver. So I just kept thinking of The Crate, and I was just like, oh yeah, tell it to call you Billy. And I'm just like, okay, something has to happen. When is that going to happen? And I was really like, I kept thinking of Coraline with the little closet door and all this kind of stuff. And again, thinking of things that I'd rather be watching. And I'm just like, when's it going to what's going to happen? When's it going to happen? And then when it finally does, I mean, I laughed out loud at the creature. I like the design. I like the kind of electronics that it has to make it move and all those kind of things. Though, of course, it's a cheat by having it like around his legs, so you can just see the puppeteers behind it, kind of thing. But yeah, I wanted to like this more than I did, I think.
Her name is Lizzie.
That's the daughter, right?
Yeah. Gentlemen, I fucking love this episode. I've
Good.
loved it since 1984.
I figured.
If there's an episode I've seen of this one 1 billion times. There are images in this. When I spoke to, if you've listened to our first episode about Tales from the Darkside, you heard our interview with Robert Draper, who was the director of photography on this episode. And I said to him that there aren't many times during an anthology series where I could point to an episode, and in my mind, that's the definitive episode of that series. But this episode is the definitive episode of Tales from the Darkside for me.
Wow.
Yeah, but you have to remember that at the time there were two gods ruling my existence: George A. Romero and Tom Savini. Tom Savini, the Wizard of Gore, the Splatter King. For young Child Malone, there was no bigger personality in horror. And
I like that, by the way. Child Malone. Now we've got a new version. Child Malone.
Not Childish Gambino, but
Child
yeah,
Malone.
Child Malone, yeah.
Tom Savini, look, if you don't know, Tom Savini was a combat photographer in Vietnam, which, came in handy in his future career as a special effects makeup guy. Started his film career with George Romero. He did all of George Romero's films up until Two Evil Eyes, did all the effects on all of them. In addition to doing Friday the 13th and Friday the 13th Part 4, the better of the two as far as what Jason looks like, and on and on and on and on. Tom Savini is a fucking god. So not only did I watch this episode obsessively, I owned the videotape that had this episode on it. There was a videotape that came out put out by Fangoria magazine called Scream Greats. And the first volume was about Tom Savini, and they had many, many clips of this episode in it, and they had him like with the creature. I love the creature. The shot that when she's finally come out of the closet, by the way, her furtive little running moves through the thing with the camera work there, it's great. It's great. It works so well because it's exactly the pause is enough, and then the sprinting is just great. Anyway, when she's under her bed and we pan from her lying awake and trying to sleep and down to those eyes opening, holy God, that is definitely the stuff of my nightmares, those eyes in the darkness and thinking about that under my bed. Anyway, I'm not going to convince you guys of anything. I mean, look, but I also want to say that this is not just strictly nostalgia, because rewatching this now, there's so many people here who sort of graduated under like Romero University who became directors on this show. And I got to say, virtually none of them have copied Romero's style. I mean, they may have learned how to make the movies from him, but there isn't really a whiff of Romero's style because his style is all in editing. What I noticed about Savini's style here is he's actually more leaning towards giallo and sort of the Italian directors. Just even in the color scheme, like in that little hallway, the almost Suspiria-like stained glass that's on either side of the door, stuff like that. I thought it's a pretty good, I mean, this is his directorial debut as well. And I think it's pretty solid and sure-footed, and kind of sad he didn't get more directing gigs. I always liked that Night of the Living Dead remake.
I think the episode's well directed. I just think that I honestly think it would have benefited from showing the creature earlier, seeing more of the creature. And I mean, I understand and appreciate, as I'm sure we all do, like why they didn't for a whole host of reasons, namely one of them, the fact that it's easier to not show it and until and hold that back until you absolutely need to. But it waits a little long, and then we don't really get to see much of them trying to convince us of something that's not happening, that, Fritz Weaver is in trouble. They don't really, it just ends essentially. Like she dies and then it ends. And I wish they had just cut a little bit of her running around the house out and fleshed out the ending a little bit more, because to your point, Father Malone, like I would have liked to have seen more of Fritz Weaver in that puppet. Like, really? Like, because that was the part of this that was like the most interesting, because he's clearly been doing this for a while. And this is something that he's been up to for quite some time. And like, I kind of want to know what the fuck's been going on. It's intriguing. And then the creature itself is so interesting to look at. You're like, what am I looking at here?
I could see a Tales from the Darkside 2.0 series remaking this episode more to what you guys are saying, which would be 10 minutes of setup and then 20 minutes of her being chased around the house by not only this ghoulish creature, but the professor who's renting her the room is, attempting to capture her as well. That would be really fucking cool. But this is just a slow burn. What's under your bed? What is that little door in the room that you can't find a key for sort of situation? And I don't know. I love it for that. It's a really good Halloween night kind of thing to watch.
Yes. It has that setup in spades of like the thing that feels rather, again, like approachable for most people. Like you're in a room and there's a door in that room that you can't open. That's relatable, especially if you visited family or relatives. Like, and I'm with you. Like, if it were remade now, it would be a much more effects driven thing.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
But I love Lizzie, and I think they've shot her well. One thing I did talk with Robert Draper about was the fact that Lizzie goes from very horrifying looking when she's attacking the young grad student to when she's cooing with Fritz Weaver. She's really adorable. I just thought that's such a trick that they pulled, that they were able to do that, which I've always admired, going from horrible to kind of cute.
Yeah, the cooing definitely helps quite a bit. And then when you realize, because at first you're like, oh, she's gonna attack him, oh, and then okay, no, it's his daughter, it's okay. I thought it was nice.
I found it to be heartwarming in a very weird way. And like the puppet is, up until it isn't, like strange and off-putting, and then it's not. Like, and again, like I think credit goes to those eyes on the design. It's really about the eyes, which are like, again, like strange to look at, but oddly like sad, and like get a lot of empathy through the creature's eyes for sure. And I think it being like stark white, which would imply like it's been living in that closet the whole time, which is like, it's pretty gnarly.
Poor thing.
Yeah.
I mean, she just needs to eat every once in a while. You can't really blame her.
Grad students be damned.
I mean, he maybe should not be renting to grad students and killing them. Like, there's got to be some other situation if he needs to do this every once in a while. But
like why not just feed her raw meat? Like, I don't get it.
Maybe
she's like a lot of trouble.
I don't know Lizzie's life, but I want to.
Just go watch Cobweb. Essentially the same thing.
No, don't even sully this thing with that.
Similar idea though, similar setup.
Sure, absolutely. This is
better. Like, yeah, because it's only 20 minutes as well. It's not an hour and a half movie. That's the other thing. Like, that is probably the benefit here, is that it is 22 minutes. Like, if it were longer, I would not want to watch a 45-minute version of this episode. Not if it was situated the way this is.
Right. If the last 20 minutes were this fucking hunting, chasing, scary thing, then it would kind of be cool. I don't know.
I mean, we saw that Night Gallery with that gorilla.
Exactly.
Yeah. I'll just take any opportunity to bring that up again.
I loved that episode.
Just tell him to call you Billy.
Yeah, like and Fritz Weaver's here. Like, oh, I don't know. I love this one.
I enjoyed the puppetry. That's for sure. Like that. I enjoyed that like aspect of it for sure. It's a puppet I've never seen before.
Yeah, it's a great design, and obviously, look. If anything works, it's because the puppet is as it is at the end, and that's because Savini like gave it his all. Like, they didn't pay him for his work for little Lizzie here.
Right.
Also, this was the one episode where I actually believed they went on location and shot in a house, and they did not. They shot this in a fucking warehouse in Queens.
Huh. It doesn't seem set bound.
Not at all. Like, not a whiff of it. Like, on someone's, they cheat it, and on occasion it'll look a little off, and you go, but then they correct. But like here, I believe that was a fucking house. It's certainly the foyer.
Right.
The foyer.
Yeah. Yeah.
But nope.
No, it looked really good. That stairway felt very real. I'm sure it was only, 7 feet tall. But yeah.
Exactly. Movie magic. Gotta love it. All right. On the next episode of Midnight Viewing, we'll be taking a look at 2 episodes from season 1. Those are The Word Processor of the Gods and A Case of the Stubborns. One of them is the first appearance of a adaptation of Stephen King on television. Midnight Viewing, the horror anthology podcast, is a proud member of Weirding Way Media Group. Our theme song was composed by HP. Until next time, what are you working on? Where can people find it, Chris? Stachiw.
WeirdingWayMedia.com. You just mentioned it. I'll say it again. Yeah, that's where you can find things that I work on, things that so many other people work on as well. More people than just myself. Yeah. WeirdingWayMedia.com. What about you, Mike White?
I'm glad you said Mike White, because there might have been another Mike here. As for me, yeah, same place. WeirdingWayMedia.com, where pretty much everything that we work on is there. Stuff that I work on by myself, with you guys, one of you, both of you. The only thing that's missing is our amazing Rankin on Bond podcast, which is available only to our Patreon subscribers at the $10 level and up. So get on that Projection Booth or CultureCast Patreon and enjoy that. But otherwise, everything's at weirdingwaymedia.com. How about you, Father Malone?
Check me out at weirdingwaymedia.com. I've got a bunch of shows on there, including Night Mr. Walters, the Taxi podcast, where HP and I discuss Taxi, one of the greatest sitcoms of all time. You can also hear Dark Destinations. It's a radio drama I write and produce. And if you want to give me a couple of dollars, go to Patreon, Father Malone.
Until next time, try to enjoy the daylight. Midnight Viewing, the horror anthology podcast, is a proud member of Weirding Way Media. Our
theme song was composed by HP with an assist from Donald Rubenstein and Erica Lindsay. If you want to hear these episodes early and commercial-free, become a patron over at patreon.com/Father Malone. Not only are the episodes up early, but we have extended interviews and bonus podcasts where we spotlight the best episodes of horror anthologies from every series. But if you just like the show and want to help, please share it with your friends and give us a rating on your favorite podcatcher. Together we'll keep journeying through the places that are just as real, but not as brightly lit.